Yes, you're hearing me before the Renegade Thinkers Unite intro. And you know what that means. We're going to be playing a recording of Renegade Thinkers Live, our live streaming show about hot marketing topics featuring some of the most amazing CMOs from CMO Huddles and some cool new gins. Today's show is with Chi-Chi Liang of Alloy, Marshall Poindexter of OpenEye Scientific, and Luanne Tierney, who just left her role at Betterworks. She's currently head of partner marketing at Fuse. And they talk about their experiences establishing marketing at small startups with small budgets. It's an exciting challenge for the savvy CMO, and these seasoned leaders share a ton of really helpful tactics for growth. So let's get to it. I really hope you enjoy this episode. I'm your host, Drew Neiser, live from my home studio in New York City. If you've ever worked at a startup, you know both the exhilaration and exasperation of what it means to make marketing magic, to make something out of nothing, no budget, no resources, and occasionally no clue where to start. But here's the good news. There's no bureaucracy to grind down your ideas. There's no limitation to your imagination. And there's not a heck of a lot to lose by being experimental. You get to learn fast, fail fast, and iterate until something sticks. And you get to make up for the absence of budget with sheer ingenuity. So as a student of marketing and marketers, nothing brings me more joy than to talk to CMOs at startups, which is exactly what we're going to do on this show. With that, let's bring on Chi-Chi Liang, EVP of Marketing of Alloy. Hi, Chi-Chi.
Hi.
Nice to see you. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you, Drew?
Good, thank you. So set the stage for us. What was the marketing situation when you arrived at Alloy in February of 2020?
Yeah, so when I got there was a one-person marketing team, which for any of us who have done that is an incredibly hard job to do. One-person marketing team. From a system standpoint, we had Salesforce and HubSpot, but that was primarily used as an email tool without any scoring, without any sort of clear lead to opportunity funnel process definition. Strategy was like weekly plays that sales and marketing were trying to do without any overarching go-to-market strategy, without a clear ICP or segmentation or verticals. And the programs that we were doing were, there were a lot of them, and they were all one-off though. They weren't really connected to one another. They weren't unified under, an integrated campaign theme. So that's kind of what I stepped into.
So other than that, everything was perfect.
Yeah.
So now one of the things that is so clear when you describe the situation, if you hadn't been in a marketing department that had all of those functions, you wouldn't have known what you were missing. So I do want to suggest to folks that sometimes it really pays to work in a larger organization and learn the skills of marketing and then bring them to a startup. So let's talk about where you started, given that, you got so many different things in terms of you have what strategy to go, you have very little staff, you have very little technology. Where'd you start?
Yeah, so staff and team was first, right? So I was actually fortunate in that, the one-person marketing team that was there, she's fantastic and just was, getting pulled in every which direction. And so was able to get her to focus on what she wanted to do anyway, which was more on the content side, communication side, brand side of the house. And then I had a lucky gift, drop in my lap, right before I joined, where one of the other former employees in the company who was an SDR really wanted to shift over into product marketing and try it out. And junior employee, hadn't really done it before, but I was just like, sure, why not? Like that, product marketing was also my background. So I felt like I could help coach and guide someone in that particular function. And then I hired right away a person to run demand generation and was fortunate enough timing wise to find someone I had worked with before who was available. And so all of that sort of came together pretty quickly in the beginning. So I got kind of lucky there.
Interesting. So we have content, we have product marketing, and we have demand gen. So it sort of covers a lot of bases there. We've talked a lot about in CMO Huddles about product marketing and how hard it is to fill that role. So interesting that you decided I'll fill it with somebody, I'll teach them it because you know it, as opposed to trying to find a product marketer. I just, for any CMOs that are listening right now, that may be the trick here. if they know the product, you can teach them product marketing. Interesting. So staff was first. Okay, then what was the next step?
Yeah, the next thing then was actually just more of the product marketing work, right? Just getting very clear on who our buyer was, who our ICP was, and actually start the actual positioning and messaging work. So, very tactically, sitting with my new BMM and sharing with him like a template in terms of, here's like a messaging framework document. Here are the different parts of it. Let's start working through this together and fill it out, to the best of your ability. And the beautiful thing was he had already been in the company for a year or so. So he had, and was in a position where he was talking to prospects on a regular basis. So that was helpful. And then you iterate on that, right? So that to me is always where you want to start, because all of the great demand gen and all these other things that you want to do, you need to make sure that you understand who you're targeting, what it is that you're actually, what your value statements or positioning is relative to the challenges that they're having. So to me, in my mind, you always need to start there.
Yeah, and it's just for anybody who's listening, if they weren't sure what ICP is, it's ideal customer profile, right?
That's right.
And so one of the key things here with this is you can't take a shotgun approach. So you really do need to narrow things. So when you say ideal customer profile, I believe you were talking about a finite group of people.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. So looking at, actually just, going and interrogating, and actually when COVID hit, because I joined shortly before it did, that actually was an exercise I think everybody had to go through, was really rethink, like, who should we be targeting now based on who might be doing okay in COVID, because, right, there were a lot of companies that were struggling, and therefore they're not going to be a good target for you. And so the timing of that actually sort of coincided well. Not to say that COVID was good for any reason, like generally speaking, but in that regard, it gave us a chance to really sit and think about what specific verticals within consumer goods, because that's who we generally focus, is consumer goods, but what verticals within them are the ones that are actually going to do okay. What size company do we want to go after? Because it was one of those things where the company started sort of more, I think, very typically, right, like smaller tech companies, and is trying to push its way up. And so we really wanted to interrogate that and think about what made sense given where we were with our product and our business. So it was then, using that and then working to build out then very like a specific named account list off the back of that, align with sales and how to go after that, and so on and so forth.
Very cool. So if we have got two key takeaways here: build a team first. And by the way, we could just go straight to Jim Collins and good to great there. It's always build a team first, find your hedgehog concept, and then of course roll it out. In this case, we decided you were focused on target. Okay, cool. All right. Well, let's move on and bring JD Dillon, who is the CMO of Tigo Energy. Hey, JD, how are you?
I'm great, Drew.
Good. So let's describe the situation when you got to Tigo 8 months ago. How many employees? How big were you? Talk a little bit about your situation.
So I had it great. I had twice as many employees as Chi-Chi. So I had two.
Yeah.
But like I'm sure it's a common situation, I had 2 employees, but I had 5 dotted line multi-hat employees, which in marketing at a small company often means, for instance, in Brazil, there was 2 salespeople. One was the sales leader. The other was half sales, half marketing. So I had multiple multi-hat people that sort of did marketing-ish things.
So
and
that doesn't feel ideal, JD.
No.
That doesn't. And so, did you sort through that?
No, I just formalized it a bit by having a regular meeting to give a little bit of meat to their multi-hat. So I put them on an org chart that was dotted line. I actually had a regular meeting because it's worldwide. I alternated Wednesday mornings or Wednesday nights. Me and my employees had half the guys and gals, half the guys and gals. So I started a little bit of structure to make it feel like more of a team.
Right.
And they responded accordingly.
Okay. So we've got team. Then that was priority number 1, is sort of work with what you have. And then from there, let's talk about all right, we've sort of got employees, but what next? What were some of the things that you looked to do?
So I happen to believe 100% in the book, which we've talked about before, the first 90 days. I'm a huge believer in that. And so I followed that as a playbook, as a kind of call it an academic playbook. But one of the things I did that is marketing-like is I had interviews with half of the company, which is daunting if you're a company like GE. But for us, that meant about 40 people and a dozen customers in various parts of the world, in various levels of channel. So I had 40 interviews with internal employees and then a dozen external interviews. And I asked them all the same exact questions, gathered it up, generated some data, captured it in a document, and presented to the board of directors and the CEO. Unfortunately, I hate this, but it's such a well-worn analysis, is a SWOT. I find them very tired, but they're tired for a reason. Oftentimes, stereotypes are stereotypes for a reason, or old school practices are there for a reason.
Yep.
So I did a SWOT, and then generated a simple strategy from that.
Okay. And so how long was it, and did you give yourself before you started getting messages and campaigns in the market?
31 days.
31 days. What took you so long?
Now I did, because I presented at 30 days, because that's the first of 90 days, the first tranche of 90 days. Now what I did do was jumped on the one priority that I knew the CEO had, that I did my first press release 3 days in. So press releases matter a lot to the CEO. They matter a lot to the board. For the company, they're a big deal. So that I jumped on, and those were my quick wins. But I purposely said no to almost everything until I published my SWOT and marketing plan.
Just to buy yourself some time. It really is, because you could execute and you could do some stuff, but it's not going to add any value, and it's not building off of anything that you can ascertain. And you don't know which direction to even point.
Absolutely.
So, all right. So 30 days, you present the SWOT. What kinds of things, so you're in the market now 31 days. What are you learning? What are you doing?
So my strategy was three-pronged, and it had a graphic to go with it. So I'm in solar. So I took a wonderful picture, and my strategy was lightning, thunder, and structure. And I had a wonderful picture that I found, which had lightning with a storm behind it going onto a solar roof. So I was able to say lightning, thunder, and structure. Lightning is sales enablement. Thunder is public relations. And structure is messaging and business processes. And I relate everything into those three. There's 4 things in each of those 3 buckets that I won't go through, but the bottom line is that was 12 tactics going into 3 strategies. And if I can't funnel into one of those things, for example, social media, right, I don't touch.
You don't do it, because you can't do everything, because you don't have a big enough team. You've got to have priorities. By the way, I love lightning, thunder, and structure for a couple reasons. And I really think that some CMOs miss the opportunity to be communications experts and communicate in a way that's unexpected, right? Because that's what marketing often has to do. So just by putting lightning, thunder, in structure there, you've set yourself apart versus probably anybody else in the company. One other quick story. So yesterday there was an announcement that no one had been hit or died by lightning in 2021. And then the very same day, some poor golfer got pinged. Anyway, lightning was on my mind. And of course it always is, because of my hero, Ben Franklin. But all right, let's go on to, so that's very cool. I think that's really, the things that I heard there that I just want to emphasize on this show is you have an opportunity as someone with a small budget to be incredibly focused, keep the organization focused, and get the organization excited about it. And the lightning thunder structure certainly did that. All right, let's bring on Luanne Tierney. Luanne, who was recently CMO of Betterworks and is now back to partner marketing consulting services, running her own firm. Hi, Luanne.
Hello. Where was the golfer hit in terms of lightning? I'm a big golfer.
I want to say New Jersey. And by the way, I immediately Googled how many golfers have actually died hit by lightning. And the number since 2013 to 2019, 10. Now, compare that to 40 fishermen and 18 boaters. So you're much more likely to get hit by lightning on a boat than you are on the golf course. So anyway, I bet you
I wasn't worried. I was just curious.
Anyway, so let's talk about your time at Betterworks for a bit. I think you were about 100 employees-ish or so, well past startup, but still startup mentality. How did you first approach competing with your larger competitors?
So I joined just like Chi-Chi did right in the beginning of the pandemic. So what I did was when I joined, I met with the sales team and I listened and I asked, what do they, when they're winning against the big guys, what do they say and how do we win? And then when we're losing against our big competitors, why? Because we needed to get clear on our differentiation messaging. Also, like the other two, I looked at the team and I said, you know what? We did not have product marketing. So we took our head of SEs and turned him into the lead of product marketing so that he could really lean in on the messaging. And then I noticed there was a gap around content. I mean, content is king, whether you're a teeny startup or a big company. So we hired a content marketing person and built an editorial calendar and then put a whole strategy in place to make some noise in the market.
And so interesting again. So listening tour, which I love, and I sometimes I do cringe when I hear stories of someone going in full guns blazing right away. When there are a lot of probably smart people in the organization who've been thinking about this problem. And they probably didn't get it wrong. They may not have seen it. They just needed somebody to come in and listen a little bit. So a listening tour, get the right team in the right places. All right, from there, what happened?
Well, the other thing I would say is, as a part of the listening tour, I was very fortunate because our CEO, Doug Dennerlein, has a long history in this space. So I really tapped, he was at one of the big guys at Success Factors and sold his company. So I had a total advantage there to hear, fortunately you have a CEO who's been at a big player and then gone to the smaller size company and wants to disrupt. So that was also a big advantage to get inside and hear what customers or prospects want in terms of this next generation of a tool, of a software tool. So the other thing I did was draft off some of our customers. So we immediately interviewed them. We knew no one was traveling, so we would interview them over video, just like you're doing now. We captured their comments, why they chose Betterworks on camera, really, and then did some joint press releases, like with Udemy and with some of the customers that were buying our software to create some noise in the market and show up bigger than who we really were.
What is it? Fight above your weight class or something like that. Press is one of those tactics that small businesses rely on quite heavily. And, the thing I always wonder about that, I know the answer, but I'm curious, were you able to track, okay, we got this coverage and then, we saw increase in site traffic or lead generation or anything like that?
Well, so we track share of voice, which means how many times people are talking about you in the press that's unpaid. We would track site traffic. We would also package up this content to post on social media and use it as an opportunity for our sales team to get in the door and have conversations with prospects. So, a marketing lead doesn't just happen overnight. So you have to track it over time.
And I'm so glad you brought that up. And B2B, I think it was on the podcast I did with Shirley Macbeth of Forrester, where she mentioned that it's like up to 28 contacts, 28 touches before you close a B2B sale. So yes, the PR may not itself, that article, but how you use that article and the opportunity to have a third party credibility. Oh, look, they got some ink. Get your salespeople to do it. So again, we're trying to make the most of every single activity. I'm curious, and I think we should bring everybody back on right now. And let's get tactical, team. Let's talk about some real tactics. We've talked a little bit about press releases. I'm curious, what about Google and spending money at just, at keywords? Is that has that been proved to be a useful way of driving cost-effective leads? But
I think it's one tactic in the effort. I mean, you could spend huge amounts of sums with Google AdWords, but like Chi-Chi said, you need to be clear on your ICP. You need to go after your vertical market, and then your Google AdWords need to be a component of your strategy. But I think we swung too much on that and pulled that back and focused on some other areas because you could spend a lot.
So, and let's talk about that. That's interesting. Let's talk. Overspending on Google is an interesting challenge because it feels good, right? You're only paying when they click on the ad. So eventually, I'm assuming that there was an analysis done and the cost per click was translating that way down funnel into a cost per lead. The math didn't look as good as you had hoped.
You really need the complementary content to go with that, a complete strategy. You can't just rely on a Google AdWords to bring in a lead.
So
yeah, I would double down on what you were saying, Drew. It's, that's actually where we were when we started. We had some AdWords running and they looked like they were doing great, but because we didn't have all of our tracking and measurement set up just yet. Like we were still being modest with how we were spending. But then once we actually got our tracking and set up and we could see, okay, none of those, or very, very few of those, were actually converting into any meaningful opportunities. We completely changed sort of the approach that we were taking there and actually started focusing more on LinkedIn as a channel, which is more expensive. That being said, if you are really tight on your ICP, you have a target account list, then you're willing to spend more per lead going after the right people.
So because I often hear that from folks is that LinkedIn is really expensive, but it's not if you close a deal as a result of a lead that started on LinkedIn, assuming the value of that customer is worth a lot more than the cost of that LinkedIn ad, right? I mean, and so it seems like one of the things that, and we haven't really talked about this, is you really need to understand what a sort of value per customer is, right? Relative to a cost per acquisition. And do you see yourselves somewhat in the direct acquisition business, or is this more about getting leads, getting them to sales, or both?
I think it's both. I mean, I think it's, when you're in a B2B company, and in our solution, which is, in the targeting consumer goods companies, and it's like analytics, supply chain analytics and planning software, it's pretty complex stuff. And so, you're not going to be able to get the whole story or the whole message across just through marketing materials and content. You do need to have a live conversation. You do need to show a demo of the product, so that's where that partnership with sales, of course, is always so critical. But certainly when you're trying to market and sell more complex B2B solutions, I think it's integral.
Got it. So and let's just keep going with some tactics. Has anybody tried a tactic that sort of worked particularly well that surprised you?
We did direct mail during COVID, which it's had its own challenges because people aren't in the office anymore, and so you had to go and figure out where they were. But I will say that again, small companies, small budgets, and we got creative with sort of the offering that we had, which was, we were targeting supply chain people who during especially the early days of the pandemic, of course, we all heard about it on the news, right? Just every day was like they were firefighting and they were just, completely underwater. And so we sent around, we chose a gift that was a chocolate pretzel pizza that we sent to them that had a little hammer, and it basically said, we know you're dealing with a lot right now, take out your frustrations on this and not your colleagues or your customers, and so I think because we were just a little bit maybe a little cheeky with that, we actually surprisingly got a lot of responses to that.
Not surprised at all. And again, that's what this really, this show is about, is you can, as a smaller company, you can try things like that. A hammer and a giant pizza pretzel. That's hilarious. I'm curious, JD, have you been able to get to any tactical things that you've tried that are sort of a little bit out of the box?
Out of the box, no. So I'm gonna send you a little bit sideways here.
Okay.
I am not tasked explicitly at all with lead gen.
Okay.
Zero. The CEO believes that sales sells and marketing markets, and it's got a little bit of an old school view about what that means. Therefore, I am in the unique position to have no pressure to generate leads, but my goal is a year from now, that will be where marketing makes its mark. So I'm going to take what I know can be done, frankly, by listening to things like the CMO Huddles, I know can be done on lead gen, bring it into the company, and that's going to be the impactful aspect of marketing. So, perfect. But back to your precise question, I launched with On24. This isn't a promotion for them, but they're great. With On24, we do webinars, and I got 969 people to attend webinars in the first 2 months, which for me, people mean installers. So I have the benefit of going after a rather specific skill set, installers, people that install solar. So that's pretty specific. It's a knowable list of people.
Right.
Albeit a long list. There's 5,000 in the United States, but it's a list nonetheless.
Well,
so webinars have worked great.
Interesting.
We did webinars during COVID, but we also saw webinar fatigue because everyone was doing webinars. So we created a Slack community and then use that as an opportunity to have like-minded professionals connect with each other, share best practices. So that worked really well. And then like you, we also did a goal summit. We had a few thousand attendees, which we were thrilled with. And that gave us some really good opportunities as well. But we tried the webinar a week during the beginning of COVID and stuff. And at first everyone was attending, and then you saw people were like, okay, I'm a little webinared out.
All right, well, save the rest of the tactics. JD, thank you for mentioning CMO Huddles, because I'm going to talk about that in a second. And we have talked a lot about in CMO Huddles, which we began in April of 2020, really helping and focusing on B2B CMOs and how they can make sure that, not only do they have a seat at the executive table, but they are making significant contributions to their companies. Just so you know, if you've never heard of it, it's an invitation-only subscription service that brings together an elite group of CMOs to share, care, and dare each other to greatness. One CMO described Huddles as timely conversations with smart peers in a trusted environment, while another called it a cross between an expert workshop and a therapy session. Chi-Chi, JD, Luanne, anybody want to add anything and share your experience on Huddles? Anything you want to say?
Well, what I've loved about the CMO Huddles is, as we're looking at MarTech stacks and technologies, it's a great place to have a sounding board to say, hey, have you used this technology, and how has it worked, or what are the things to think about when you deploy it? So real live advice is fantastic.
I love it.
I also love, part of the service that Drew, you provide is that concierge service and help connect one-to-one when you know that there's something that one of us is concerned about or has questions about, and someone else has experience. So that's been, I've taken and given both in that sort of setup. So that's
which I'm grateful for. JD?
And I will add on to my previous endorsement. But I will say, you mentioned earlier Jim Collins, and I happen to love Stephen Covey as well. To me, it's the sharpen the saw of the 7 habits. A lot of us, it sounds like we have small teams but even if you have a large team, if you're the CMO, you're sort of at the top of the marketing heap, and you need other folks to grow and develop and challenge and hear ideas. So to me, it's sharpening the saw.
Sharpening the saw. I love that. Just happen to have a saw right behind me. Love it. Thank you, JD. All right, let's pivot for a second and talk about one of the things that small businesses struggle with is sometimes they get paralysis because they don't have that much money to spend. I'm curious if you've tried something in the last 12 to 18 months that that didn't work, that you could share. Or maybe at another job, so it's not current, but something that you've tried that you just say, I'm not going to do that again, or I wouldn't do it in these circumstances. Anybody want to give us one of those?
What comes to mind for me is, honestly, I think we're doing that all the time in marketing because there's so many, I'm thinking specifically with like third-party media programs, content syndication, those sorts of things. And for me, coming into Alloy, which was a new space for me, I didn't have any experience with any of those media companies or vendors who were coming at us offering different demand gen programs. So you're testing those things out and you're trying to figure out which ones seem to be the right ones for you. But there's a ton of trial and error that's involved in that. So
any error that you can share? I'm trying to save somebody a little time here.
Yeah. I'm trying to think how this would be useful. We engaged with one to do some research, right? And then the off the back of the research, then obviously you have material and content that you can then promote, and they could promote for us and all of that. And then realizing as we were going through the process that they actually were not very well skilled at the research part. So there's probably something to be said about, doing more upfront vetting, even though everything sounded like it was, the right approach and the right audience and all of that. Like just really taking that time up front to do a little extra vetting to save yourself some money and headache later on.
Drew, I think
Go
what
ahead,
she's
Luanne.
saying around you have to experiment with your content, and there's going to be some vehicles that work really well. We talked a little bit about Google AdWords or LinkedIn or content syndication. I don't think there's one thing that you avoid. You have to try. You have to experiment with the tactics based on your budget. But the one thing you have to get right is you have to have content, because there's really no other motion if you don't have the content to try it in those channels. And I think you have to have real clear, differentiated message within your own content that you're creating.
And when we're talking about motion, we're talking about the sort of thinking about a funnel, top, middle, bottom, where they are in the decision-making process, and making sure we have some video, some reports, some user analysis, some comparison tools, something that will make it easier for them to ultimately make a decision, and hopefully that decision is around you. Is that a fair description? So it's all sorts of different types of content along a pretty long sales cycle.
Exactly.
Okay.
And
all right.
Drew,
Yeah.
I heard your question a little bit differently.
Okay.
These are all good tips on outward looking, which is our job, day-to-day job, call it, of marketing. But in addition to that, most of us are probably, if we're just starting at a company, at a small company, we're on an executive staff. So I will tell you a very vivid mistake. I thought it would be a good idea to reorganize our board presentation. Now, I happen to know that I'm right, just because I always know that I'm right. It was a horrible idea to exert my influence in the second board meeting and try to organize the rest of the staff to come up with a better way to do it when the CEO has been doing this for a while. So that was a hold on, slow the roll, and get some accomplishments under my belt before I start exerting areas like that.
Yeah, you made me think, JD, we got to do a whole huddle, maybe even a month's worth on managing boards and solutions that people have done, because you're right. And some CMOs have mentioned in the past that they wish they knew some things early that they didn't, they had to learn the hard way. But my clear understanding is sit in 3 before you say a word, unless you're forced to do so. Because chances are there's somebody there who's going to judge you or think they know marketing or whatever. This is the moment where in the show where we ask, what would Ben Franklin say? And I just happen to have we have bobblehead Ben to join us today with this, because one of the aphorisms that he had that I like, it's simple: little strokes fell great oaks. And one of the things that we talk about is as a focus on a target. We've talked a lot about that, focusing your approach, getting the sales team and the marketing team all aligned and working together so that we are doing little strokes against big oaks. Okay, thanks, Ben. It was awesome. So let's talk about just the job notion, because there are a lot of CMOs who work at big companies, and sometimes I think they get nervous about working at smaller ones. What's the best part about working at a smaller company, even if you're resource deprived?
I think you're seeing the impact of your work. So what I did when I joined Betterworks is within a week started communicating to the company. Here's what marketing's doing behind the scenes. Here's what we're doing, and was very transparent about communicating with the team. And then hearing, I mean, you were hearing straight back from them, because you're in a small company. Hey, I really like what you're doing. Thanks for being so transparent, sharing what's working, what you're fixing, where you're going to. And then also getting feedback on what you're working on. They'll give you'll know right away what's working and what's not. I mean, they're pretty open about that.
I love it. That's great. So we've got, you really do get to have an impact pretty quickly. All right, next question for you all. If you had more money, what would we're going to get a 10x in the budget because you just got another 50 million in funding. What's the first thing that you would do? Chi-Chi.
Build out my team more so that we can do more stuff and try out some of those investments that are harder to measure or take a longer time to drive impact, which I have not been doing because I wanted to make sure what little money and budget I have is very impactful. But if I had more latitude, that's what I want to do.
Right. And that's one of the interesting things about the challenge is that you've got to show that you're driving demand, because it's a small business that you need demand. And so marketing really is a growth engine at that point. But that doesn't mean necessarily you're building brand or spending money on some of those things that may have a longer impact. Interesting. All right. JD, I just raised another 50 million and you get 10% of that. What are you going to do first?
Videos. More videos, more impactful videos, because again, go back to what I was saying earlier, with us, it's not as much for me to build demand. It's videos. And in my business of solar, drones over large installations can be photogenic and help tell the story of solar taking over the world. Solar has a tailwind, and greater video content would actually increase the tailwind to have us benefit greater than the tailwind.
Tailwind and drones, perfect. To getting you to video, I love it. Luanne,
I actually was going to say video. It's around content, because video is the #2 search right after Google. How people search for content now, or it's YouTube. So I agree 100%. And you don't even need huge budgets around video. You can do it very cost effectively, but people don't want to read long form content as much. So it's short, snackable content, investing in short snackable content.
And what phase of sort of marketing where does that play? I'm trying to sort of imagine JD, I get the visual of the drone flying over. That's very cool. But for Betterworks, more video from whom, about what?
So you could have you could do demos, you can do testimonials, you can have, customers talking about how they deployed the solution and what worked and what they learned from it.
So
and a lot of understanding of how to deploy it quickly, working with customer success.
And the reason that you couldn't afford that is just you didn't have the talent in-house, or you couldn't go out and buy the talent in order to produce those regularly.
No, we were doing that, but I would add a lot more emphasis around that. I mean, you could do it. We were doing it and doing a nice job.
Okay.
But if you could hire more, get more video, more content people, have it go faster.
And I'm time to you could also probably produce enough that you could start testing. So you could actually see, if you could produce enough, you could actually see it. And maybe there are some that would boost. I'm curious, I was thinking, have you done any B2B marketing using Facebook, paid advertising? Any of the three of you?
A little bit. Yeah.
Because I know that so many small businesses are living on it. I mean, it's a really cost-effective way of marketing the business. Just curious. So
I tried it at my last company where we were actually targeting more. I mean, obviously it depends on your audience, right? And we were targeting more data scientists, analyst types. So, those who frankly weren't on Facebook much. Now we're testing it out again because we're going after supply chain professionals, many of whom are, tend to be of a demographic that I think is going to be more likely on Facebook.
Right. And by the way, I meant Facebook and Instagram. Just any of their properties. Okay. So we're running out of time, and I want to make sure that the CMOs and the other marketers who are listening get some real savvy advice on how to stretch their marketing dollars. We've talked about doing more videos. I'm just curious, what's your one bit of advice for a CMO who's working at a startup about either how to stretch their dollars or just in general? We'll start with JD.
I would say be a player coach is the only way to go. That's I personally write our press releases. So I took our press releases. We have no agency. I took it away from my team. I personally wrote it. And it had been a while since I personally wrote press releases. I had edited them for a while. So I dusted off my style guide, my AP style guide, and did it myself.
And part of one is to make sure it's as good as it can be. Two is just to stay close, JD, to what you're doing.
And lead by example.
Right.
Everyone at a small company is worried if you're coming from a medium or a large company that you don't know how to get your hands dirty.
Right.
And you got to demonstratively prove otherwise.
I see. So it's not just about leading and managing. It is about doing as well. Interesting. Great. Really great insight. Okay. Chi-Chi, what's your advice?
I'm going to repeat something we've been saying all along, but it is about relentless focus because you have very limited resources, both in terms of people, time, and dollars. And so you want to make sure that you're going deep versus wide, and doing the homework that you need to make sure you're selecting the right things to go deep on, but doing that focus, because once you get that, you get a bit of a flywheel going, and then you can add more and more and more to it over time.
And so focus, by definition, pretty much means you're having to say no to somebody in the organization. You might have a CEO who reads a book and has 5 ideas every week. You could have a head of sales who say, hey, I've got this target. I would love for you to develop this for just this one prospect. So talk a quick second about how you say no.
I like to pull in what our product counterparts do and say, like, we've got a roadmap. Great. Let me put that on the roadmap. We'll revisit that when we've got some more time or resources to do that. So they know I heard them. They know it's somewhere. It's not being forgotten, but we also can't do it right now.
Love it. We didn't actually say no. We'll get to it. That's what we're saying. We'll get to it. Great idea. We'll get to it. Okay, Luanne, last bit of advice.
Yeah. I always say you can't outspend your competition. You have to outthink them. So in order to do that, you need to hire talented people that have modern marketing expertise who can roll up their sleeves and do the work.
Get it done. All right. All right. That's amazing. That was a lot of insights in a short period of time. Thank you, Chi-Chi, JD, Luanne. You're all great sports player coaches in JD's analogy. Thank you, audience, for staying with us. Roll the music. Renegade Thinkers Live is produced by Melissa Caffrey. Our intern is Sam White. Our botanical expert is Nicole Hernandez. For show notes and past episodes, please visit renegade.com, home of quite possibly the savviest B2B marketing agency in New York City. I'm your host, Drew Neiser, and until next time, keep those renegade thinking caps on and strong.